Hey guys, so over a year ago I made a video ranking all the medevaced players from Survivor, and I feel like this is sort of a nice follow-up where now I'll be ranking all the quitters in Survivor based on the games that they played on their seasons that they quit. And this was a very hard list to put together, as really I think a lot of these quitters aren't very good, as a lot of them quit during the pre-merge, although there are a couple of exceptions we'll be getting into. Now, before we get started, I should clarify that when I talk about quitter, I'm mainly talking about people that voluntarily left the game without being voted out or being pulled from the game by production. I will not be counting people that unofficially quit, so people like Ian from Palau, Johnny Fairplay from Micronesia, or Ben Driebergen from Where's That War, as even though these people all gave up at the end and basically asked to be voted out, they still were technically voted out, so I thought that was a bit of a fuzzy area there. And also for seasons with Edge of Extinction, I will not be counting anyone that chose to leave the Edge after being voted out, so people like Keith, Wendy, and Sandra from Winners at War, as even though these people did also voluntarily leave the game, they had already been voted out, and plus since it was a mechanic built into the game, I felt like it didn't quite rise up to the level of quitting the game. So through that, I'm counting people that chose to leave the proper game before being voted out. With that, there are 14 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 14, the worst quitter in Survivor history is also someone that was on my Medevaced player list, but here we have COLTON, and this is his game from Blood vs. Water. And it's sort of funny, as I actually had COLTON pretty high on the Medevaced ranking, as I felt like his game on Warm World, while very flawed, was one where he had a decent amount of control for a lot of it. However, now he's at the bottom of the quitter ranking, as he doesn't have really any control on his tribe, where he's pretty much on the bottom right from the beginning. I feel like had he ever gone to tribal, he would have been in a lot of danger there, where it probably would have been between him and Laura B, but he doesn't even get to that point as he quits on day 7 in pretty dramatic fashion. Jeff really tears into him as he's quitting the game, even accusing him of quitting his first time, which isn't true of course, but still, I feel like this game is one where there's really nothing good to prop up, where really the only thing is maybe he wouldn't have been voted out had they gone to tribal first, but he still would have been in a bad spot, and because of that, he is here number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and I kind of feel bad for having this person this low, especially considering the circumstances that led to their boot. However, if we are looking at their game, it's not very good, but here we have Sue Hawk's game from Survivor All-Stars. Now again, this is mainly looking at her game, and really, I feel like the main thing about Sue is she's never really in the core majority of the Chapera tribe, where I always felt like the core of that group was Rob, Amber, Tom, and Alicia in 4th, which basically led her and Rob's sister Nino at the bottom. And while she does vote correctly in the Rob sister Nino blind side, I feel like she didn't really have much of a path forward in the game, where had Chapera ever gone back to tribal, she probably would have been voted out, especially after Rupert and Jenna come over to their tribe. And then you have her quit itself, which is obviously pretty understandable considering that Richard engaged in some inappropriate contact with her during the immunity challenge, which caused her to really get out of the game. She obviously has a very emotional exit, and obviously all of that is pretty understandable, but if we are just looking at her game, I feel like she wasn't really playing that hard, and I feel like there really wasn't much of a path for her forward, which is why she's here number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and I could see a debate for this person being a little bit higher, as they did seem to be in an alliance at one point. However, by the end, they were completely on the outs, but here we have LINDSEY OGLE from Survivor Cagayan, and LINDSEY's also pretty tough. I feel like out of all the people on the list, she probably has one of the flimsiest reasons for quitting the game. That is definitely a factor in her being lower on the list. But if we are looking at her game, she is technically part of Cliff's alliance early on, which did seem to me the majority at first. However, even then, Tony was able to flip that group to where had they gone to tribal, she probably would have been on the outs there. After the swap, we see the bronze having the majority, and again, it did seem like they should have had the numbers there, but she gets completely blindsided at the Cliff tribal, loses her closest ally, and the only tribal that she attends during the season. She also has a pretty confrontational relationship with Trish that boils over after said tribal. The two of them get into a pretty big fight to where LINDSEY almost assaults her, but then afterwards she walks away and uses that as her excuse to quit the game, saying that she doesn't want to be a bad role model for her daughter, which sure, I guess. But really, I think LINDSEY's game is mostly mediocre. I did consider putting her higher because, again, there was a point where she was in an alliance with Cliff, which did seem to have the numbers at first, but even then they lost the numbers by the time they went to tribal, and really considering everything else, I can't really have her any higher than number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and again, I do feel kind of bad for putting this person this low considering the circumstances that led to their quit. However, considering how early they left the game, coupled by other factors, I did decide to put JENNA MORASCA here, and this is her Survivor All-Stars game. And JENNA's game is hard to assess, mainly because of the winner aspect, where the winners were very much targeted on this season. And while I think JENNA was probably one of the safer ones in the short term, especially with Richard Hatch on her tribe, to where I feel like he probably would have been taken out first, I feel like that aspect would have made it very hard for her to have a very deep run regardless. However, even then, she does try to get things going. She tries to get a women's alliance going with Kathy and Cheyenne, and she does manage to win the first few immunity challenges, giving her safety there. However, by day 9, she does decide to leave the game to be with her mom, who is dying of cancer, which is the right call considering that her mother died not too long after she got home. So obviously it's a pretty understandable quit, and with the winner aspect as well, I did consider putting her a little bit higher considering that the cards were stacked against her. But at the end of the day, she was still a very early quit. She's someone that didn't really have much going on in her game, even with some activity early on, and she never even attends a tribal, so it made it hard to put her too much higher on the list. But considering that I feel like she didn't do as much wrong in her game, I did decide to put her a little bit higher at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we're taking out the last of these really early exits, but here we have B from David versus Goliath, and I think B probably has more potential than a lot of the other players that we'll be covering on this list. However, she is also a relatively early quit, where she only attends one tribal during the season, and even then she gets blindsided when her ally Jessica goes home, and she's really on the outs on that initial David tribe. Now it is possible that had she lasted around until the swap, she could have been put in a better position, but before then she does get injured during a challenge, which does cause her to quit the game, given that this injury could have threatened her career as an MMA fighter. Again, a very understandable quit, but at the end of the day, I feel like with her being a relatively early exit, I couldn't have her too much higher in the list, so I feel like she had more potential than a lot of the other players we already talked about, which is why she's here number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we actually have someone that had a bit more longevity in the game. However, even then, they had a largely up and down game. But here we have Kathy SLECKMAN from Survivor Micronesia. And I actually debated Kathy a little bit. I did consider putting her a little bit higher actually, as she did technically have the majority at one point. While she is initially on the outs with Tracy and Chet, they are able to get the numbers by that first tribal to take out Mary and then Mikey B. However, even then, I would give a lot more credit to Tracy for getting the flip to happen, as I feel like Kathy was more so on the outs. Mind you, she was on exile during a lot of that led to her being targeted initially, but even still, she's able to be in the majority and be in a good spot on her initial tribe. But then she gets a pretty bad swap where she is separated from both Tracy and Chet. You also have Penner getting medevac, which takes a big blow to her morale as well. But even then, she wouldn't have been the next boot had they gone back to tribal, as it seemed like both Jason and Eliza were on the outs there. She at least had decent relations with the other favorites on that tribe, but even so, we see her mental state deteriorate over the course of those coming days, which eventually leads to her quitting the game. Now, obviously, a major factor behind her quit is the fact that she was taking medication to deal with postpartum depression, which she ended up going cold turkey on before going out, fearing that she wouldn't have been cast if they knew about her medical history, which led to her state of mind sort of deteriorating. And obviously it led to her quitting the game, which is pretty understandable. But if we are looking at her game, it is one that has some highs. I mean, there is the fact that her group was able to have the numbers later on their initial tribe, and she even gets a bit unlucky with the tribe swap as well as Penner leaving the game. And obviously she is immune during a lot of the game as well due to her tribe winning challenges. But even so, I feel like she didn't have as much direct control in the game compared to people like Tracy, who she was aligned with. That did make me put her a bit lower on the list. That, and also I don't really see how she wins the game either, given she wasn't the most well-liked person either. That did leave her a bit lower on the list. However, at the end of the day, I feel like she's a bit higher than certain people are expecting, which is why she is here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and I seriously debated these next two, as even though one of these players made it quite a bit further than the other, I feel like both of them were in pretty similar positions positions on their respective tribes, and it was just a matter of ordering their merits. But at number 8, I did decide to go with the earlier boot of the two. But here we have Papa Smurf from Survivor Fiji. And I think Papa Smurf benefited a lot from being on the Moto tribe, the Have tribe, as I feel like had he been on the Ravu tribe, he probably would have been an early boot given his perceived physical weakness, and plus the fact that he was the oldest player on the cast, but through that he was able to skate on by during a lot of the early rounds. Now I still think he probably would have been voted out early had Moto gone to tribal, given he was seen as physically weak. And plus on the show, it didn't seem like he was in the best position given his only real allies on that group was Cassandra and Dreams. However, I think a big thing propping him up on this list is the Builders versus Explorers dynamic, where it wasn't really highlighted on the show, but before the cast was divided into tribes, the cast was divided into two big alliances, the Builders and Explorers. And Papa Smurf was part of the Builders Alliance that included the likes of Earl, Yowman, and a lot of people that would end up making the merge and being in the majority alliance moving forward. And considering that Papa Smurf was part of the Moto Alliance that was winning all these challenges, I feel like had he been able to get to the merge, he probably would have been able to be a number for that group and through that have a deeper run. Now, at the end of the day, I don't really see how he wins the game through that, where I feel like he probably would have been outclassed at some point. And even then, even though a lot of the builders were still part of the Moto tribe early on, I still feel like he probably would have been cut earlier on had they lost challenges. But obviously, we never see that play out given that he has to quit the game due to medical reasons, which again is pretty understandable. And there's a serious debate over why he wasn't outright medevac due to this, but it still leads to him technically quitting the game. And I feel like those are all factors that make him a bit higher in the list, but considering that he was still a relatively earlier exit, and considering that while he probably would have had some potential moving forward, there still isn't too much merit to his game. I can't really have him any higher than number 8 here. Now moving on to number 7, and like I said, this person was in a somewhat similar position to Papa Smurf, although there are some key differences. But here we have JANU from Survivor Palau, and like Papa Smurf, JANU was on a very dominant tribe in terms of challenges, where she was on the Koror tribe, which won all the immunity challenges in the pre-merge, which allowed her to ultimately make the merge, or absorption I guess. However, she was also not in a good position on her tribe to where had they gone to some more tribals in the pre-merge, she probably would have been taken out, where I don't think she would have been the first boot, where obviously we do see Willard being the clear consensus target on the one tribal they go to in the pre-merge. But I feel like even beyond that, it would have been between her and Kobe had they gone back to tribal. And then once Stephanie joins their tribe, we see Kobe and JANU being on the outs, where Kobe is a very clear consensus target there. And even then, Kobe throws a vote onto her as a self-preservation move, which is obviously pretty bad. And then afterwards, we do see the target initially be on Stephanie, until JANU decides to quit the game in order to protect Stephanie for one more round, which is not great at the end of the day, even if it was for a strategic reason. But really, I feel like JANU probably would have been one of the first out on the original core group when Stephanie was gone. And really, I think JANU probably had less of a path forward in the game than Papa Smurf, assuming he had made the merge. But the main reason I had her above Papa Smurf is, one, she did at least make the merge, unlike Papa Smurf. And plus, I feel like she wouldn't have been the first target on her initial tribe had they gone to tribal, as we very clearly saw during the Willard tribal. And even then, while I think she probably would have been the next out, there could have been a push to get at Kobe instead. So I do think she was probably slightly better positioned on the initial tribe, but at the end of the day, I feel like both of them really had a lot of trouble in terms of getting through the game. But with JANU making it a bit further, I did decide to have her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and sort of similar to JANU, I feel like this person is largely here due to their longevity, and there are some minor pros to their game, but I still would say this person's game is not great. But here we have Julie McGee from San Juan del Sur, and again, there isn't too much to Julie's game, where she does make it to the merge largely due to her tribe winning challenges. She is in the majority on the one tribal that she does attend, where she votes out Drew Christie, although even then she gets some votes against her from Keith and Reed. And moving forward, she's also dragged down by her relationship with John Rocker, which leads to her probably having less of a shot to win the game, as you could argue that people didn't want to give the money to John Rocker through Julie. She She's also put into some hot water at the merge when she hoards some food, which isn't great. But to be fair, a minor pro to her game is the fact that she was considered part of Jeremy's alliance, and we see that Jeremy and Missy don't want her to quit the game at the merge as they need her number to take out Josh, but ultimately she does quit the game due to her missing John Rocker, which is kind of funny considering they end up breaking up after the season, but still, it's still a factor that leads to her quitting the game. So there isn't too much to the game, and again, similar to a lot of the people we already talked about, I don't really feel like she wins the game even if she gets to the end, but considering that she was in a somewhat swing position coming into the merge, I think there was enough to have her a bit higher on the list, but really I feel like her game is probably mediocre and largely booned by her longevity, which is why she is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and there is a debate for this person being lower on the list. However, I feel like this person doesn't have as many holes in their game, which is why they are this high, but here we have Dana Lambert from Survivor Philippines, and sort of similar to Papa Smurf, there is a debate over whether she should have been medevaced instead, given that she was very sick. However, this is also technically a quit since she did decide to leave the game after being cleared by medical. However, I feel like Dana was in a good enough position for most of her run, like her tribe did win a lot of those early challenges. She never ends up attending a tribal due to her tribe winning all these challenges. And she did seem to have good relationships with a lot of her tribe, where she was part of the majority early on to take out Penner. She was also shown trying to build a girls alliance with Katie and Sarah, and while I don't think that would have worked out, I don't think Dana would have been the first boot of that group, where I feel like Katie and Sarah were always going to go out before her, but ultimately we never really see how it plays out considering she ends up quitting the game on day 12, and obviously that's a big knock against her, is the fact that we don't quite know where she would have stood had they gone to tribal. But I feel like she didn't do as much wrong in the game compared to really a lot of the people we already talked about, and I feel like she probably could have had more of a path forward, but considering all the question marks with the state of her game and really considering how early she left the game, I feel like 5 was about as high as I could put her. Now we're moving on to number 4, and I feel like these top 4 are pretty definitive. I feel like these 4 are clearly the best in this field of players, although there are still plenty of flaws with them, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But at number 4, we do have the original quitter of Survivor. We do have Austen Taylor from Pearl Islands. And Austen is another player that's kind of hard to discuss, as obviously he does give up his will to play the game from early on, where he really struggles to adapt to the island life. Now, I think some of that is self-inflicted, given that he basically sold all of his clothes during the initial bargaining challenge in the village, but he also developed a staph infection during his time there that really harmed his health, which makes it understandable why he quits the game. But even then, he's able to join the majority alliance alongside Savage and Rhino, due to them being the strongest players on the tribe. Now, I did consider putting him a bit lower, as it does seem like a lot of the reason he's being kept around is due to his physical strength, whereas I feel like if he was physically weaker and not seen as useful in challenges, he could have been voted out due to his desire to quit. But due to his physical strength, he's largely kept around due to that. But he's still part of the majority for a lot of the game. He does vote correctly at each of the tribals that he attends, and there's even an element of the outcast twist where he had essentially made the merge, like the final 10 where the merge normally happens, except the outcast twist comes into play where the Morgans have to go to tribal one more time, and that's where he sort of gives in and decides to quit the game. And obviously he's treated pretty unfairly by Jeff due to this, especially now knowing the circumstances that led to his quit, where he's pretty much made an example out of, and it's obviously not that great. And there is a debate over whether he would have won the game, where obviously his desire to quit would have been very much used against him had he made it deeper into the game. But I also think due to his positioning, had the outcast was not happened, he probably would have been in it for the long haul, where assuming he doesn't quit, he would have been a part of the majority moving forward. And with the Morgans getting in the numbers, had Sean been able to flip over from the Drakes, he probably would have been able to have a deep run. Now, I still think he probably loses by the end of it, but I still feel like the fact that he was part of the majority for most of the game, and the fact that he had some longevity in him had he wanted it, I think there's a debate for Austen being higher on this list, but I think the fact that he was so openly willing to quit from early on, only to be kept around due to his physical strength, is something that holds him back, especially compared to his top 3, which is why he is here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we are jumping to the post-merge to talk about a pretty notable player, and someone that I talked about not too long ago. But here we have Purple Kelly, And again, I already talked about Purple Kelly in my ranking of all the players under 21, so you can check out that video. So I won't go into too much detail here, but again, I feel like Purple Kelly was in the majority for most of the game, but not really in the driver's seat for a lot of it. Where again, she was part of the initial majority to take out Shannon. After the swap, she is someone that's able to vote in the majority there, taking out Kelly B along with Jill. And then after the merge, she's able to stick with a lot of the younger players to take out the likes of Alina and Marty before being left out of the Brenda blindside. But then ultimately we get to the double quit where both her and Ayanka quit the game. And I've talked about this before, but I think Purple Kelly's quit is largely justified given that she didn't really have a lot of clothes to wear, which led her pretty miserable around camp. So I don't really fault her too much for her quit, and I feel like she was treated pretty unfairly by production by her being purpled in the edit. But at the end of the day, I feel like compared to the top two, I feel like she didn't have as much agency in the game. Plus, I don't really see how she wins the game even if she survives her round, where it didn't seem like she had that much respect from the jury. But considering she is one of the few quitters to make the merge, I did decide to have her relatively high on the list, which is why she's here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and I feel like this was a pretty clear top 2 for me, and again, it was a matter of ordering them. But at number 2, we actually have the highest ranked pre-merge boot left to talk about, and here we have Matthew from Survivor 44. And I did seriously debate between Matthew and the number 1 person, as I feel like Matthew displayed a lot of agency across his season, where we saw him using all these fun and creative tricks, such as using a shot in the dark at the first tribal, followed by creating a fake idol to build a game relationship with Jamie. I feel like all that's pretty impressive. However, I will also admit that my view of Matthew's game has gone down, where I will admit that I did kind of overrate him in my top 10 players in the new era video. I know a lot of people were not super happy by me having him in the top 10. And plus, I feel like my view of him has gone down further after listening to Carson's postseason interview, where he said that he caught on to Matthew's game right away. He was immediately suspicious of him. And I feel like that might have carried over into the merge, where I feel like while Matthew could have been this middle figure, I feel like he eventually would have been exposed and be taken out because of that. And I feel like Matthew is someone that probably would have been seen as a bit too overtly strategic to be getting too deep into the game. And plus you have the nature around his exit, where on one hand, it was obviously very understandable given how much his shoulder was hurting, and with medical not quite pulling him from the game, the choice was given to him, where obviously he chose to seek treatment because of his injured shoulder. But at the same time, I mean, what was he doing climbing that rock to begin with? I feel like it was probably one of the more preventable injuries in Survivor history, but still, by the end of it, I understand why he decides to leave the game. But I still find this game to be mostly impressive. It's definitely one of the most active games out of these quitters, and even though he was taken out earlier, I find myself more impressed by his game than a lot of the people already talked about, but I still feel like the number 1 person edges him out, which is why he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the best quitter in Survivor history is Nayanka from Survivor Nicaragua. Now, again, I did have a debate between her and Matthew. However, considering she was also in a pretty strong position for most of the game, and considering that she obviously had more longevity compared to Matthew, I feel like that gave her the edge over him, where early on she was a pretty clear figure for the majority alliance to take out Shannon. Along the way, she finds an idol as well. Post-swap, she's part of the majority again to take out Tyrone as well as Eve, though even then she was the minority's target during the Tyrone tribal. And then after the merge, she's again part of the majority, sort of similar to Purple Kelly. However, I feel like Nayanka was a more clear figure within the core of that group, where she was shown being close with Chase and Sash that allowed her to get through a lot of that game, and she was even included on the Brenda blind side. And I feel like unlike Purple Kelly, had Nayanka not quit the game, she would have been in a better position moving forward to get towards the end of the game, and I think she was more likely to win the game compared to Purple Kelly. And I know a lot of people have argued that she would have outright won the game had she gotten to the end, where I don't know if I fully believe that. Now, I do think there are scenarios where she wins, such as if she got to the end with Sash and Purple Kelly. However, I think against Chase it becomes a bit difficult. Same thing with Fabio and Dan Lembo. And even then, I feel like there could have been a push to get her out due to her being seen as a big threat later on. So I don't deny that she could have won the game had she gotten to the end. However, it's still pretty far out to where it's hard to say if she would have actually gotten there, but she still played a pretty impressive game for the most part. I feel like of all the quitters, she clearly played the best game, and because of that, she is here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. Now, recently I decided to launch a Patreon as another way of supporting the channel, so if you like this content and want to consider supporting me, feel free to do so by clicking the link in the description. In addition, I'll be making additional Survivor content in the lead up to Big Brother 25, so there'll be plenty of fun content there. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.